I just think it's wonderful to have such leadership and such a giving person, and someone who was so dedicated to Nashville, trying to make this place special. With that, I welcome Ann Roos.
Very generous. Is this working? And Andre, the only reason we decided to do it here was because it has a wonderful shelter for a picnic. Has nothing to do with how many stories there are. Andre LaQuire is right there. She will report to her husband. No. So I thought maybe I would just start from the very beginning of this in a way. Yes, it's true that I was interested in architecture, and in New York in the 60s and 70s, as some of you may remember or some of you have heard, was covered with graffiti. I mean, the trains, the subways were covered with graffiti. Graffiti artists went to town on buildings, and one of the buildings, which really didn't deserve graffiti, was Grant's tomb, which is a very fine, gray, formal, classic structure on the Hudson River. And the Park Service was out of its mind trying to figure out how to stop that kind of vandalism. And so they heard about an artist who came originally from Chile, and he was very inspired by the mosaics of Gaudi in Barcelona, which some of you may have seen. And he decided that that might be a way to involve community. And they hired him, being desperate to figure out some way to stop the graffiti. And he designed a bench going all the way around the tomb and invited neighbors, among them many of the graffiti artists, of course, who created the mosaics and covered it from one end to another. Huge bench all the way around. And it was actually very effective. No more graffiti after that. In fact, the graffiti artists protected this bench. This was their great success. And nothing ever happened to it, nothing ever happened to the tomb. She could do it. So I'm sitting at home, ironing, not sitting, and I get this call from the mayor of Nashville, and he says, well, Ferris Deep has convinced me that we need to have a woman, and he thinks you're the right person for the job, and I've checked. I know you can't be bought. That's what he said, literally. And he said, well, we think we can get this through the council, and will you do it? And I said, sure. By that time, I was sitting down on the steps thinking, but that changed my life. That call is what launched me into civic life, which was wonderful. And Branscombe, Chancellor Branscombe, had this thing about his faculty getting involved in town activities. It was really important to him, so there was a lot of encouragement in that direction. You know, it was something he felt strongly we should be doing. None of this ivory tower stuff for him. So that's how I got involved. And then the Planning Commission is required by the charter to have a representative on the park board. They're required to have a representative on the arts commission. And I was available, and the men were all working, and I was happy to do it. You know, anything to get out of the house. I had this $5 help. Anyway, so I got to thinking, and I thought, okay, a community art project might be the thing to build a reconciliation on, especially if you get, Vanderbilt people coming over, city people working on it. And that's what it became in my mind, a symbol of reconciliation. And also, I think when the start of a playground over here, I thought, we don't want a playground just for handicapped kids. Let's just build something that's so tempting and wonderful that all kids will come and play there, and they'll mix it up. And that was really the reason that it seemed worth doing. So my husband and we said, okay, we're going to do this. And the park board thought, sure, give it a try, why not? And so I got Pedro's number, called him, wrote him, called him. Charlie and I got airplane tickets for him to come down here. And finally he agreed. And we had a meeting with the park board. We introduced him to the community at Harris Hillman, and he said he'd do it. And this was the following year. So we had a year to prepare, raise money, get everything in place. And that would have been around 79. And I went to Alec Hurd, who I knew, showed him the slides. He said, okay, now the prices are going to seem really low to you. You're not going to believe. Every time we've restored this, it's been much more expensive than the original. In 79, Alex said, well, I'll give you $5,000, and how would you like to do it? Would you like to use it as a match? Would you like to do, what would you like to do? And he was wonderful. He was all for it. And then I went to visit the legislators. I went to Duck Henry, and we wanted some money from the Metro Arts Commission to the Tennessee Arts Commission. The Metro Arts Commission gave us the largest grant they had ever given to an art project, which at that time was $12,000. They loved everything about it. They loved the artwork. They loved the participation, and all of this they thought was great. So we had that money, and I went to my family. They were very generous, and started writing letters to friends, and that went on for quite a while. And so that was one thing that went on that year, and then I just visited every tile store in Nashville and explained the project and told them what we needed, which was waterproof, frost-proof tile. And did they have any leftovers? Did they have any sample boards? What we wanted was interesting colors, interesting designs, things that people could make pictures out of. That's how things happen. And the only other thing, we had so much publicity. I have a drawer full of stuff that eventually will go into I think should go in the city archives. But I also have 2 autograph books that have the signatures of 1,000 plus people who worked on it. Pedro insisted that everybody sign their name, and he tried to get them to say what they did, which some did, some didn't. Here's shark, BW, fish and coral and fish, bearded professor, flower vase, rabbit. It's fun.
Are there any other questions? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. If you can, let's walk over to the dragon and we can take a group picture. Would that be all right? So, sorry, you might not have heard me. Let's walk over to the dragon and we can take a group picture, and Anne can talk a little bit, maybe of a few mosaics, and then you're free to have some more refreshment. And thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. These were done in our backyard. My mother did some, Mary Hobbs, Nick Hobbs did some of the fish, and Pedro did these heads. This lighthouse I did, and the divers and the dolphins and all of those water scene. I had a friend who was a ceramist that gave me these little pieces, and I thought, oh, they look like water. I can have surf.
Oh, yeah.
surf on the rocks
Yes.
of the lighthouse, you know. And that's my husband's checkerboard. I don't know if anybody ever plays on it. And of course, this is the beautiful scene of Mount Fuji, and that was that was Charlie, the physics professor's contribution. Yes, that's what the Japanese mother did. This whole scene with Mount Fuji and the tree, and it was very carefully done. It's never had any problem at all. This is the baby. I was telling somebody that there was a water fountain in the mouth, but we'll see that. And the kids kept throwing sand in it, and it ruined it. And the Parks Department replaced it a couple of times, and then they just got fed up. No more fountain. But I'll tell you one thing. Well, Doctor, every time you see some wonderful mythological scene, it was Dr. Exton. So you can look at the baby yourselves later on. The tail is the one. There's the tail, and then it curls around, and the head is where the water fountain was. Maybe we should go over there. That's the baby. And we decided we needed to have Fannie Mae D's. And Chris Tibbett, who was an artist in town, was in the book club with Fannie Mae. And she said, I'll do it, but my husband, I cannot leave him. He's very ill. So if you'll let me take Tal home, I'll create Fannie Mae D's. She loved roses, she was a reader, and that's the little house she was protecting with her strength. And so that's Chris Tippett's work. And then a friend said, well, we need a compass, of course, to show where north is. A compass. The baby was, I added that with a date. Pedro and community folks, and 1981 is when the baby was born.
Oh.
I think the first piece that was put on was right over here, one of these water feet. I'm just so happy to see it looking so well. It's in great shape. You know, and later a mother who had a child at Harris Hillman raised all the money for Lily's Garden, which was specifically for handicapped kids, the whole project. Yeah.
And
Here's Niagara Falls.
why did they not do anything on the belly?
Well,
Too hard to get it to stay?
that must have been, and also it's not flat enough. I think technically probably was too difficult. Yeah. Yes, with a rainbow over the buffalo. Those were parents of a medical student.
How fun.
And this was my son too. His younger son did this. But this was an art teacher. You can see the difference in style. That was Rusty Freeman's work. This is all of this right here. This is mythology.
Okay, sure enough.
Up there,
Wow. Is this the Statue of Liberty?
probably. Yeah, I think there is a Statue of Liberty. Yes. Yes. And the Hobbit.
Oh, yeah.
This one means heaven, means under, and one, and family. So under the heaven, we are all one family.
It's perfect.
It's written in Chinese, but we share the Chinese in Korea and Japan.
This was a musician in the symphony.
Oh.
You know, you can't help but or be affected by the people who did these things. I mean, I couldn't say which was favorite, because it's almost like saying, who's my favorite person? But that was sweet. And I mean, the head has been restored a lot because the kids keep climbing up. So it's hard to say that Pedro, but he did most of the head originally. you can see the baby here. There, that was
And then here's his head.
Right,
and
right,
his
right.
Paw, and his other back paw. So he comes all the way
exactly.
Pedro do some of these pictures himself?
Well, that's right. That's exactly. Well, he did the original baby. I think it's been restored heavily, but he did a lot of the work on the head. You know, he was here all the time, and he just kept going. And we needed to beat the winter weather. I mean, toward the end, we had heaters up, and I mean, people were actually neighborhood people were bringing food just to keep people working.
Hang on, we got one more person coming. Come on, Sam. Do you see the dragon too? Yeah. Thank you, Kristen. Hold on. Let me get up close and personal.